of this conference. We're very pleased that we're going to start today with a visually very rich presentation because our first speaker is Professor Levon Chukasyan, who's one of the best-known experts of Armenian art. In addition to several books and hundreds of articles, he was quite instrumental in setting up the UNESCO Chair of Armenian Art History at Yerevan State University, and he's currently the director of the Chair of Armenian Art History and Theory at the same university, Yerevan State. So without further ado, Professor Chukasyan.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to express my thanks to organizers of this conference and for invitation to participate in it, especially to Mr. Sorin Antoi and Varujan Voskanyan. And the subject that I want to present is only part of a huge monography, which is not yet completely published. And it is concerning, generally speaking, Armenian massacres, genocide, liberation struggle, and Armenian painters and sculptors. And this subject was represented with numerous Armenian artists, not only in 19th century, at the end of end of 19th century, and in 20th century and up to now, the subject is preserving its importance. And first Armenian painters who started to illustrate this subject, they were very much depressed and by the Hamidian massacres, by massacres that Sultan Abdul Hamid organized at the end of 19th century. And among first painters who illustrated this dramatic event, they were Harutyun Shamshinyan and Vatkes Surenyans. And Vatkes Surenyans was the most famous with his artifacts illustrating events of national history and including the Armenian massacres and genocide. And the most famous works on this catastrophe is this painting called Sanctity, or Sanctity Trampled. And as you see here is interior of Armenian church. Amen. Among these paintings, the most famous is painting illustrating interior of a looted church with manuscripts on the floor and killed clergymen lying there. And as Surenyans explored during his whole life, explored Armenian art and wrote about Armenian art, so he used very important artifacts, let's say in this case, an icon hanging from the column. This icon is influenced by Armenian miniatures of famous Gospel of 989 called Echmeadzin Gospel. And next to it there is Khachkar, which is typical for the interiors of Armenian churches. And sorry. And again, once again, he is showing interior of church and artifact. This artifact is called Massacre of Virgins, and here you can see killed girls inside of church, and he used even a famous wooden door of Sevan Monastery here. So his paintings not only show the trauma, but or looted Armenian art and culture, generally speaking, but he's showing barbaric behavior towards culture, a culture of numerous centuries. And he is famous also as a book illustrator and illustrator of theater pieces. And after Hamidian massacres in Russia, there was Russian Writers Society helping um, war victims of 1915, and they have published the charitable anthology called Writers and Painters, Nevsky Almanac to the War Victims, that also contained works of famous Russian painters. And among these painters, there was also Surenyans. And here you can observe a woman with his child, woman who is playing tar in the street, and child is singing to collect some money for their needs. And this kind of paintings are also uh, known among the series of portraits of refugees, whom Surenyans portrayed in Echmiadzin when he was visiting it after genocide. And not only Surenyans, but also another famous Armenian painter, Arshak Fetvachan, also, and Sarkis Khachaturian. These painters also portrayed numerous refugees and illustrated them in their national costumes and in their rugs, in their miserable situation, losers of homeland and relatives. And here are these refugees that Surenyans portrayed in Echmiadzin. And one can just imagine that people who lost everything and miraculously survived and came to northern Armenia, they were obliged to stay on the ground, to spend day and night in open air, starving and waiting for some help. Another famous painter, who is world well-known painter, is Sovanes Ayvazovsky or Ivan Ayvazovsky, who is well known as a sea painter. And numerous paintings are related to Turkish-Russian war and especially sea battles. But among and next to these works, there are also some artifacts which are portraying the tragedy of Armenians themselves. And among them is quite well known the painting which is called Night, Tragedy at the Sea of Marmara. And this painting is preserved in Nisham Palanjan Seminary in Beirut, in Lebanon. And it was published during the last decade and became well known. Uh, Till this painting was known, also this work, that location is unknown. Uh, in a previous painting, you see that Turks are throwing Armenians into the sea, and in next work, which is lost or in some private collection, but it was represented, printed, published in one almanac. So it is also showing the same subject. Um, this is one of those sea battle compositions which illustrate explosion of Turkish warship, and it is made at the end of life of Ayvazovsky, one of his last works was again concerning these sea battles. Another famous painter who lived same time is Georg Bashinjarian, who is well known for his landscapes, usually peaceful landscapes of lakes, of forests, and etc. But among his paintings, there is this one, which is called "Setting an Armenian Village on Fire." Also, painting made after massacres of Silishem, and this is showing Armenians in exile, and you see how the Armenians are trying to get rid of uh, Turks through this canyon in snow, and part of Armenian painters who represented this subject, they were not themselves uh, victims of genocide or massacres, but they have read about that. They have saw the refugees. They have lost their relatives, and so the subject was very emotionally touching Armenians. Painter Grigor Gabrelian, who also was not indifferent to the plight of his fellow Armenians. His paintings, Turkish Armenian Porter and Turkish Armenian Worker, made in Tiflis, date back probably to late 1880. These pictures portray two long-suffering men that left their homes in Western Armenia and came to Caucasus, and like thousands other Armenian refugees, were forced to work as unskilled laborers in big cities just to scrape enough money to secure their own and their families' livelihoods. And Gabrielian Gabrielian also portrayed this Armenian praying at Hajkar, and this work is made during Hamidian massacres, and it was in Almanach that I have already mentioned. The brotherly, another almanac that was also published in Russia and entitled "The Brotherly Assistance to the Armenians that have suffered in Turkey," and this was published in Moscow. And illustration is included in that publication. Arshak Fetvajan, famous national painter who created this very famous painting, which during his lifetime was published and multiplicated, and reproduction of that was in many houses of Armenians. And this is showing child Armenia, and it has also another title, Women of Sassoon. And as you see, this painting depicts a woman of Sassoon who is armed with a rifle and protecting her newborn baby at an edge of a cliff over the gaping abyss. Pinning her hopes on the rocks of her homeland, this barefoot Armenian woman is looking fixedly into the distance, tensely following the enemy's advance. Clasping her baby to her bosom, this valiant woman of Sassoon, who has lost everything, symbolizes the liberation struggle of the nation that arose for the sake of its future. I have to remind that this period, uh, even second half of 19th century, was period when freedom fighters were fighting in historical Armenia in northern Armenia, in Vaspurakan area, in Sasun, in Moks, Shatakh, and even northern Armenians were penetrating from Caucasus and trying to arm peasants and organize the struggle against Ottoman government. And Fetvajan made portraits of founders of Armenian Revolutionary Federation, Հայկական Դաշնակցություն, portraits of Christopher Mikhailian, Rostom, who was Stepan Zoryan. By the way, he was in prison in Romania for a while. And Simon Zavarian. And these portraits are preserved in Boston in a redaction of Armenian newspaper Hayrenik. And unfortunately, dates are unknown, and they were not very much published. Fetvajan illustrated books, illustrated different invitation cards for spectacles and decorated churches. And this is from Anthology, this illustration, which was which is called Ziteni, published in Tiflis in 1915, that depicts a lifeless body of an Armenian warrior and his wife mourning over him. At the same time, Fetvajan illustrated the album entitled Armenian Volunteers. As you know, the Armenians who were in different countries, when they heard about the organization of deportation of Armenians, of their relatives, of their families, and of sending them to deserts, and about atrocities of Turks, they started to form volunteer regiments, and they came from America and from other places to Caucasus and to fight against Turks inside of Turkish army, Russian army. And this album had two editions, one after another, and in a central section of the cover page of the album, there is a picture in a round framework of an Armenian volunteer wounded in his head and wearing a sheepskin hat. The volunteer is depicted seated with a child in his lap, while under his feet there is a snake which is cut in many pieces and which symbolizes Turks. The warrior is holding with one hand a barefoot orphan girl in a torn dress. Depicted right behind him is a crying woman who covers her face with her hand. This woman who placed her hand on the shoulder of the volunteer as her only hope is a collective image of many thousands of Western Armenian refugee women. At the left side of the picture, there are two volunteers firing shots from the trenches. A body of the dead Armenian warrior is lying next to them in a pool of blood. There is an inscription beneath the fallen soldier and filled with his blood. Death is the same everywhere. It is only once that man dies. In the right section of the painting, there are three more volunteers. One of them is killed and is lying on his back, while the other two keep fighting. The inscription below says, "Blessed are those fallen for their nation's freedom." That inscription, too, is stained with the blood of the fallen soldier depicted above. In the background of the picture, there is a blood-red horizon with the outline of Armenian mountains below. In fact, the painting provides a concise depiction of tormented and fighting Armenia drawn into the world war. Owing to its romantic pathos, to a combination of pain and mourning and to underlying heroism, the picture is one of the more pronounced expressions of patriotism in the new Armenian painting. It is noteworthy that subsequently a postcard was printed with this picture from the cover page of the album. A considerable print run of the postcard was disseminated among people. I have included also works of Panos Terlemezyan. who was himself a freedom fighter. He was Vaneti from Vaspurakan, and sorry, and he was one of the most famous freedom fighters, and he was one of the organizers of resistance of Van Armenians uh, during genocide. And due to this organized resistance, inhabitants of Van were mostly saved. And when the Russian army liberated part of Vaspurakan and entered to Van, so the resistance committee was obliged to organize the uh, advance of Armenians from Van to northern Armenia. He was trying to go to Europe and to study art history. And when he entered Russian Empire, Turkish government who was informed about his presence, they have demanded from Russian Tsar government to arrest him. He was arrested and put in prison in Revel. And there he made his portrait. Afterwards, he was liberated and went to Germany, where he studied in München Art Academy and became quite famous later when he also studied in Paris in Julian Academy. This is the painting which was not very much published and not so popular, but it is concerning to the subject that I want to represent. Mother looking for her son among dead bodies. Painting, he depicted a woman mourning over a lifeless body of her son that is lying among the dead bodies of Armenians slaughtered by Turks. In another painting, refugees mourning for their homeland. Painter is it is a sketch, and it is showing several bunched up Armenian women refugees are mourning in moonlight over their relatives and over the loss of their homes and lands. The picture makes a strong impression due to the cumulative power of the silent pain of the people. And this is a portrait of a refugee who is wounded, who is barefoot, and this is one of paintings which is showing this man, and it seems like this homeless person would shortly stretch out his hand to passers by asking for alms. Probably Telemesian depicted here somebody from his compatriots that have survived. He made a portrait of General Andranik, who was himself a freedom fighter, and later he became the head of Armenian Volunteer Army, which was fighting Turks next to Russian army. This is the portrait, self-portrait, which that he made in Revel in prison, and it was in New York in private collection. And he was the first painting. This is the first painting which is showing Komitas, his friend. And Komitas, as you know, is a famous Armenian composer. And uh, since then, Komitas was portrayed numerous times, but by many Armenian painters, and he became kind of icon, a kind of a symbol of genocide of exiled Armenian intellectuals who was miraculously saved, and uh, unfortunately, people step by step forgot that he is the author not only the Sharakans or not only Armenian folk songs, but he is a painter of very joyful songs, even for kids. And he became his music became like dramatic music, which is played usually at funerals, which is not corresponding completely to his image. And Komitas was painted several times, but previous painting is the most famous. Reproduction of which is one can see in many books and in many articles. Yerishet Hatevosyan was also close friend to Komitas. Even they died the same year, the same day. One in Paris, the other one in Tiflis. And Yerishet Hatevosyan painted this work, which is showing people who are forced to leave their country for the last time they came to say farewell to their dears who are buried in this cemetery. And another famous painting of this artist is Adoration of Cross. A poor elderly villager kisses Kachkar, setting his hopes on that sacred stone and perceiving it as his interceder with the Lord. It is his hope that his misery and suffering will become known to the Most High and that fate will finally be more benevolent to him. Moonlight at the shore of Beirut, which pertains to the 1915 events. It depicts ill-fated Armenian refugees who have been driven out from their homes and from their native land by Turks and who have ended up on a ship near the Lebanese seashores. This ship is taking them to in uncertainty, a new life in the country that they do not know. And famous portrait of Hovannes Tumanyan, um, who was called a singer of Armenian grief, Hayot Vashti Yerkich. And I want to finish with this model for a monument to be erected at the grave of Grigor Janashyan, who organized publication of Almanac which was published in Petersburg that I have already mentioned. This monument was never finished or made, and you can see that orphans are coming to give their tribute to this person, to Janashyan. Unfortunately, it was never realized. And there are too many artifacts which are portraying this subject, which can't be included in this paper, in one paper. So I just wanted to give some comprehension about first painters who illustrated these dramatic events and also Armenian liberation struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shukarsan. That was a fascinating and, as I said, visually rich paper. We're going to take questions afterwards once we hear all three papers. So our next speaker is going to be Dr. Hagop Matevosyan. As Hagop installs himself, we're going from one of the most established academics in the Armenian world to one of the newer academics in the Armenian world. Hagop defended his PhD in 2020. I think he's one of the most knowledgeable people of the Armenian diaspora in Eastern Europe. He's a sociologist. He focuses on migration, diaspora, and transnationalism. He is currently, since early this year, at the Berlin-based Center for East European and International Studies, where he is part of a research project, a postdoctoral research project on Russian migrants, and it's called Intergenerational Transmission of Memories Abroad abroad and at home. So without further ado, Hagop, I'll go to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rosmek, for your kind introduction, and also thanks to the organizers for inviting me back. So I was one of the participants a couple of years ago, and we had a nice discussion. It's lovely to be back. So I will present a bit of theoretical thinking, what we studied yesterday about ethnic ontology, but I'm going to shift a bit of the focus and claim that maybe it is also useful to focus one diaspora, just zooming and seeing what is happening within one diaspora, and play with the terms of ethnicity, but also try to go beyond ethnicity. So this, I brought a map to show my regional focus. So it's particularly Eastern Europe, and the theoretical model that I'm presenting is based on an empirical research that I've done in Hungary a couple of years ago. But when it comes to diaspora, I'm pretty much convinced from the theories of transnationalism that we cannot take on one nation state and the boundaries, because the culture what is produced within the diaspora cannot be, fully adapted to the boundaries of political polity of nation state. Therefore, we can speak about regionalism in better terms. Therefore, this region will be a particular focus of mine. Before telling a few words about the Armenian community of Hungary, a bit of historical background, let me say a few words about, I don't know if we don't need it, a few words about the major research question that I was studying, and I was quite busy in the last couple of years with the three questions. As I said, the first one is intra-group relationships, and particularly I was studying the ways of authentication of Armenian descent in Hungary as an exemplary case, and within and beyond ethnicity. The second question, which I'll be presenting today, is diasporic identities, particularly in line to construction, negotiation, and contestation of Armenian identities. And last but not least, the third block of the questions were about power relations and in particular contestation of all the new diasporas, what happens when a new migration wave comes to already established to a certain degree diasporic reality, and how this migration changes the perception of being Armenian in certain diasporic space. As I mentioned, so I'll be speaking particularly the second one, just to be closer to the theme of the conference. A bit of background of the methodology of the research. I've done 4 field trips, three in-depth interviews and observations, and also participation in different cultural and social events, what was happening since 2015 until 2018 in Hungary. A bit of sociological, input here. Sampling was quite useful to think in terms of combined sampling methods. That is to say, I interviewed not only one type of Armenian, but variations where the ones who speak Armenian, the ones who don't speak Armenian, the ones who are Orthodox, the ones who are Catholic, they were the ones who don't profess any religion. So just to have variation of being Armenian in a sample analysis. It was by grounded theory, which means all the interviews were transcribed and then analyzed as a text, word by word, sentence by sentence, and paragraph by paragraph. What I find interesting was I engaged also a bit in the discussions of self-reflexivity, particularly what does it mean to be of Armenian origin, or what does it mean to be from the Republic of Armenia and studying the Armenian diaspora, and how my own identities, being from Nakhichevan, my grandparents come from Nakhichevan, having a bit of diasporic socialization in the Republic of Armenia, and how it impacted my own interviews and the outcome and the knowledge that I'm producing as a scholar. And the last point is the theory that I used, which I will be explaining a little bit in the next moment. Okay, now let's move to the core topic, that is the Armenian diaspora in Hungary. Currently, there are multiple Armenian groups in Hungary, each of them claiming to be the only authentic Armenian diaspora. And each of these groups denies this status to the other Armenian groups. One group comprises descendants of Armenians who migrated to Hungary from the Armenian centers in Transylvania during the 19th and early 20th century. Whenever I say Transylvanian Armenians in this context, I mean Transylvanian Armenians who migrated after the Second World War to Hungary. So I'm not speaking about Romanian Transylvanian Armenians, because there's also not a big community here. Other Armenian groups in Hungary were established due to different waves of migration, one followed by the Armenian genocide by the Ottomans in 1915, while the other resulted from late Soviet and post-Soviet Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, economic and political difficulties in post-Soviet Armenia, particularly in early 1990s. I have to be also quite clear, when I say post-Soviet, I'm not telling a historical event, but I'm telling a shift in the transformation. And this is just post 1991. So that is the relevance of using post-Soviet. During Soviet times, a few Armenians moved from Soviet Armenia to socialist Hungary, and additionally, several Armenians from the Middle East settled in Hungary in 1980s and also after 1990s. Recent immigrants from Armenia and other diasporans also joined the Armenian post-genocide diaspora and held leading positions in diaspora organizations. However, this unification of post-genocide Armenians and post-Soviet Armenians in Hungary should be considered with a question mark. And a common idea would be this unification was facilitated by common cultural elements such as the memory and the commemoration of the Armenian genocide, affiliation with the Armenian Apostolic Church, and knowledge, with a question mark, at least partial, of the Armenian languages. However, all the Armenian groups in Hungary, including Transylvanian Armenians, are not homogeneous, as they consist of Armenians who speak or do not speak any of the Armenian languages, profess different faiths, Catholic, Apostolic, Protestant, consider themselves irreligious, and hold different political ideologies and have mixed ancestries.
Could you use the microphone?
Sure. Yeah. I'll try my best. Maybe I just grab a little bit of water. So coming to the post-socialist Hungary. In 1993, as an outcome of constitutional amendments in 1989, the Hungarian parliament passed nationality and ethnic minority law. With this law, Hungary legally recognized and acknowledged the national and ethnic minorities to protect their collective and individual rights. And in 1993, the minority law was established in Hungary to create specific guidelines for a minority registration. To qualify, one of the requirements was that a minority must have resided in Hungary for a minimum of 100 years. The Armenians who sought refuge in Hungary after the 1915 genocide in the Ottoman Empire or arrived after the collapse of the Soviet Union did not meet this criterion. Nevertheless, their minority status endured to the presence of Transylvanian Armenians in the country. Another criterion introduced by the law, as you see the highlight, was that a minority group must speak their native language, that is to say Armenian. This requirement would have excluded the Transylvanian Armenians from attaining recognition as a national minority, given their shift away from speaking any of the Armenian languages. However, they continue to hold this status due to the presence of the post-genocide and post-Soviet Armenian diasporic groups, because to a certain degree they still speak Armenian. As a result of state regulations, various Armenian groups with different cultural, linguistic, socio-historical backgrounds had to unite to register as a one national minority. Despite this unification, however, genuine connections between them failed to materialize, leading to struggles for legitimation and recognition of contested classificatory systems regarding the definition of an authentic Armenian descent in Hungary, who is the most authentic Armenian when it comes to Armenian heritage and culture. A bit of theory. According to Fleckstein and McAdam, a social field is formed when two or more groups seek to occupy previously unrecognized, unorganized social space. The minority law of 1993 played a significant role in shaping the Armenian diasporic field of Hungary. The law brought to light historically constructed differences between various groups of Armenians, which created but also intra-group divisions and conflicts. In response, actors of Armenian descent in Hungary strategically utilized available resources from political, religious, and mass media fields to create new cultural frames and to establish new diasporic frameworks and social orders. This struggle for stability and redefinition of collective identities highlights the importance of minority law of 1993 as an external structural condition, structural one from the political sense, for the recognition of the Armenian diasporic field in Hungary. And this also shows how the Hungarian government actually is intervening the minority relationship within Hungary. Now I would like to go a bit of hardcore theory, but I promise I will not bring too much sociology here, but nevertheless a bit of that. Pierre Bourdieu, French sociologist and philosopher, asserts that power dynamics within a field shape its structure, which is subject to ongoing transformation. So that is to say, the struggle for authenticity within the Armenian diaspora, it's not an end process, but it's not an end product, but rather it is a process. In this case of the Armenian diaspora in Hungary, the diasporic field embodies resource distribution and positioning among diaspora actors and institutions, all striving for influence on the others who could be Armenian, who could be denied that status. Emerging from competition among Hungarian Armenians, this field revolves around diasporic authority acquisitions. Who will be the most authentic one in the diaspora to classify who is Armenian but who is not Armenian? Such authority validates diasporic status identity through a contested classificatory system, alignment of descent and practice. This authentication process determines the multiple constructs of Armenianness upheld in Hungary. My study analyzes the Armenian diaspora in Hungary and how its configuration impacts the struggles of diasporic authority. Resources, including diasporic capital that I name, and its forms are pivotal. The capital accumulation, so to say, what is the diasporic capital? How much we can obtain that kind of capital to claim authority or authenticity of claiming certain people are of Armenian descent and certain people are not. The capital accumulation process established a classificatory system that creates intra-group distinctions in power dynamics. Obviously, if somebody says you're Armenian and the other one says no, you're not Armenian, so this already brings power dynamics and conflicts. This system distinguishes diaspora positions according to alignment of lineage and conduct, shaping existing and novel differentiations. Within this diasporic field, the classificatory structures extend beyond ethnicity, translating ethnic profiling. Derived from descent knowledge, distinctive categories governs actors' relationship and frame diverse contested diasporic authorities, identities. Through diaspora institutions, different actors of Armenian descent promote particular version of diasporic identity to succeed into the struggle for authority. These institutions connect with settings defined by Hungarian state policy on national and ethnic minorities. So let me go a bit to the model that I'll be presenting in the second half of my presentation. Distinct self-ascriptions and external ascriptions define each group, each diaspora group. So to say, it's not only enough to claim authentication, but we have to also understand what kind of claims the other groups have against each other. For instance, Transylvanian Armenians is one of the groups in Hungary identify themselves as such, Transylvanian Armenians in Hungary, while other actors, particularly like the Soviet Armenians, label them as old Armenians, those of Armenian descent, Hungarians, or Hungarian Armenians. So there are variations of labeling each other. Late and post-Soviet Armenians identify themselves as Armenian-speaking Armenians, and distinguish market Armenians as the new migrant groups. Those are the ones who migrated in the 90s and end up working in Chinese markets in the outskirts of Budapest. Therefore, they labeled them as market Armenians as a derogatory characteristic. Others view themselves as Armenians from the east, for instance, like Transylvanian Armenians label the ones who come from the Republic of Armenia as Armenians from the east, which is also a negative connotation. To prevent confusion and clarify the actors that I'm going to analyze, I will be just using very neutral terms, particularly Transylvanian Armenians, one group, late and post-Soviet Armenians is the second group, and the third group would be diaspora Armenians from the Middle East. Armenian diasporic field features two key axes, as you see on the graph: descent and practice. Descent ranges from strong ancestral connections plus pole to weaker connections to the minus pole, while practice spans active engagement to limited cultural expressions, which is from the plus to minus. This framework reveals diasporic dynamics, showcasing how ancestry and practices shape distinct positions. Within the Armenian diasporic social fields, two groups, particularly late and post-Soviet Armenians and diaspora Armenians, are on the right core when there was a plus descent and plus practice. So to say, they are of Armenian descent, and to a certain degree they practice their descent. Meanwhile, Transylvanian Armenians claim of being of Armenian descent, but they don't practice their ethnicity, their descent. What I would like to do now to take all the three groups and go a little bit deeper with the empirical data and show how they ascribe their own identity labels, but also how they ascribe identity labels or deny that kind of status to the other groups. So let's begin with the Transylvanian Armenians and understand what kind of diasporic self-pictures they have. And now I will rely to my empirical data, and I have to say that I will use some names, but all the names are fictional and they don't, these are real interviews, but I cannot reveal their full names, real names, therefore I will just use some similar names. Mavika, a woman in her late 60s, was born during her parents' move from Transylvania and resettlement in Hungary after the Second World War, identified herself as Transylvanian of mixed origin, I quote, Armenian and secular. Mavika's identification with Armenian origin from Transylvania asserts her symbolic authority in validating her genuine Armenian lineage. A pivotal aspect of this symbolic power is the emphasis of purity of origin, signifying Armenian parentage, as she asserts, I quote, on my father's side, both families were pure Armenians from Transylvania, end quote. Additionally, Mavika underscores her Transylvanian autochthonous identity, noting that their early settlement and intertwines it with a narrative tracing the ancestral descent to the medieval Armenian capital, Anim. I quote, we arrived from Anim, end quote. Her symbolic power is further bolstered by substantial economic capital. My ancestors were wealthy salesmen and they bought vast lands and ancestral noble titles as cultural capitals. I quote, we are also present in the Armenian nobles' genealogy. So for them, being from Transylvania, having economic capital, being rich, that is how they define being of Armenian origin. Her self-concept emphasizes pluralism as a means of authenticating her heritage. This complex perspectives weaves together references from various origins and her Armenian lineage. For Mavika, being an Transylvanian of Armenian origin in Hungary holds profound cultural significance and assimilation. I brought a part of my interview and I highlighted several things, particularly born in Transylvania, country of origin is Armenia, scared mountain is Ararat, but nevertheless we nurture also Transylvanian cultural tradition. Family heritage is important. Nurturing the Armenian culture and traditions. So you see the hybridity, you see, there's fluctuation between ethnicity, culture. And what is important also, the other community keeps saying that it only can speak Armenian. Well, I say knowing how to speak Armenian is not enough. And the last sentence, maybe just to highlight, for them, the Armenian culture is what they brought with them. And the problem is that they didn't bring anything with them. So there is no culture coming from the East for the Transylvanian Armenians. Particularly myself as well, and my own identity was accused a lot of times, claiming, oh, you come from the Soviet country, so you don't have any Armenian culture. So that was also a lot of accusations during the interviews. Mavika presented a diasporic self-understanding as a Transylvanian Armenian in Hungary in opposition to other groups who speak Armenian. She emphasized cultural authentication as a primary criteria for affirming her Armenian lineage, countering the other Armenian groups' emphasis on linguistic authentication. Now, if we move to the next empirical piece, which highlights the picturing others, how the Transylvanian Armenians in Hungary picture the other groups. And I label this part Armenians from the East. That's how we call them. Having established her diasporic self-image on the one hand as a Transylvanian of Armenian origin in Hungary, Mavika, mirroring many Transylvanians, labeled other Armenian groups as the Armenians from the East. This term notably holds derogatory connotation within the power dynamics among Armenian groups in Hungary, denoting those who settled from Armenia, the ones who came after the collapse of Soviet Union since also the beginning of the mid-20th century. Mavika initially highlighted the migration of this group, contrasting it with forced dispersion to the 1915 genocide and after the 1920 Treaty of Trianon. Then she emphasized cultural authentication for lineage affirmation, hereby refuting such authentication of the Armenians from the East, attributing their motivation primarily to economic interests. Furthermore, Mavica viewed the pure economic interests of the Armenians from the East as a strong deviation from dissent, potentially jeopardizing the Armenians of Hungary's standing by devaluing their symbolic capital accumulated over the centuries. So here's a quote.
Have any indication about the level of education of this Monica?
Yes, she has a high education. Yeah, she has high education. The Armenians from the East, that's how we call them. They came a few decades ago for money. The members of this community came one by one to have a better life, to get a lot of money. They heard about the self-government, about the money and the money. After the 90s, a lot of people came here around that time. A lot of them joined the self-government only to gain money. They were motivated by money. We were motivated by our common culture and history. They don't care about a culture or anything else. All they care about is money. So for us, it's hard to see what's happening because our ancestors have already conciliated the respect of the Hungarians in the last 350 years. The economic interests of the Armenians from the East, juxtaposed with the Transylvanian of Armenian origin in Hungary, who emphasize cultural practices, shape power relations between them in terms of authentication of Armenian descent. This contrast can result in the denial of Armenian authentication for one group or exclusive self-authentication by the other. I quote, "They want the money for themselves, and they try to keep the entire funds to their group. As we're not considered Armenians, so we don't have the right to get any money. They completely exclude us until this day. Until this day, we're not considered Armenians, but only them." And to my question, who do you consider by them? Who they consider you actually? That was my original question, and the answer is nothing. We are only those who say that we're Armenians. During the past 22 years, I talked to the highly ranked politicians from Armenia. I cannot reveal the names, just the status. And they told me that those who immigrated to Hungary in the 1990s are a waste. They are not Armenians, but financiers. End quote. Drawing on the observations of high-ranking politicians, Mavica refuted the authentication of Armenians from the East as true Armenians, particularly those who migrated to Hungary after the 1990s. Her refusal to authenticate the Armenians from the East as Armenians also reflects a mismatch between Armenian heritage and the anticipated iconocentric behavior. This mismatch arises from Mavica's prioritization of culture and cultural authentication of both Armenian descent and identity, a criterion not met by the iconocentric behavior of the Armenians from the East. So this is the position of the Transylvanian Armenians of Hungary. Now, if we move to the second position, would be late and post-Soviet Armenians profiling the Armenians in Hungary. And here I will use another interview, and my interview partner was Robert. Robert, an Armenian in his late 50s, from Armenia, moved to Hungary in the mid-1980s to reunite with his Hungarian wife. He has since resided in Budapest with his family. Prior to settling in Hungary, he worked as a professional musician, touring Hungary, Czechoslovakia in the 1980s. And following his move to Budapest, Robert began seeking out his fellow Armenians. His first encounter was with an Armenian who settled in Hungary during the 1960s, to whom Robert humorously referred as, I quote, "one of the leaders of the so-called Armenian community," end quote. Robert's use of the term Armenian community referred specifically to a linguistically distinct group of Armenians, namely Armenian-speaking community. This group encompasses a relatively small number of individuals who arrived in Hungary within the 3 decades before the 1990s, mainly from Soviet Armenia, along with others from various Soviet states, Middle Eastern Armenian diasporas, as well as refugees who came to Hungary from Armenia in the 1990s. The boundaries of this community are defined by the alignment of descent and behavior and communication in terms of speaking the language, with Robert's assumption that Armenians from Armenia, including Soviet Armenia, naturally speak Armenian. And here's a quote: "The Armenian community was very small," and he's correcting himself, "I mean our Armenian-speaking community." So the language is the thing, to distinguish against the Transylvanian Armenians. Another highlight is the number of the people. He's claiming that the community is very small, 200 Armenian-speaking Armenians. All the official statistics claim that there are 5,000 to 6,000 Armenians living in Hungary, including the Transylvanian Armenians. So there is a quite clear exclusion happening based on the language. There are those of Armenian descent who unfortunately do not speak Armenian. They're assimilated and Catholic. So now religions jumps into play. Not everyone deals with Armenian descent in their everyday life. It is the reason that there are many Armenians with an ancestral origin, but they don't want to deal with that. And the last sentence is particularly highlighted. They have a very cold attitude towards descent, their descent. So therefore, there's an accusation from the Armenian-speaking community towards the Transylvanian Armenians for not engaging enough in their descent. Therefore, there is descent, but there is no practice. So they don't practice at all. Robert highlighted the contrast between the Armenian-speaking community and the larger group of those of Armenian descent. He emphasized several identifiers of.
Can we keep the discussion for later?
Yeah. Go ahead. That's
Between descent and behavior in the larger groups. The primary indicator of this mismatch pertains to assimilation in terms of language and religion.
obviously he touches on the sensitive course here. So go ahead.
I know, but that's what we read to do, right?
You are here, so go ahead.
I think I have to sit at the front.
With many not speaking Armenian and being Catholic, another disparity in their limited engagement with their Armenian heritage in their life. So this is their self picture, and now let's see what is happening when it comes to picturing the Transylvanian Armenians. In my conversation with Levon, a man in his 50s who settled in Hungary in the 70s, was actively engaged in the Armenian diaspora institutions in Hungary, denied the claims of Transylvanian Armenians as a true Armenian, describing them rather as Hungarians who demand social seniority based on the presence of the Armenian ancestry in Transylvania. So here's a quote. There is nothing Armenian, they are simply Hungarian. Their Armenian origin is a flag in their hands. They are Hungarians or Armenians, they also don't know. But they are Hungarians. They never consider Armenia as their homeland, but Transylvania. They tell that our homeland is Transylvania. So there is an interesting thing is happening here, right? Levon highlighted a disconnection between descent and behavior by emphasizing that the Transylvanian Armenians lack correspondence between their heritage and their actions and are not Armenian. He portrayed them as a mere social gathering of elderly people without any reference to Armenian identity or Armenian homeland. This mismatch led Levon to question their cultural authentication. In terms of power relations between Transylvanian Armenians and Armenian speakers, Robert sees the former as a potent game changer. This relates to their potential to reshape local diasporic order by excluding the Armenian-speaking Armenians from the Armenian national minority self-government, if they were to win the minority elections. Like Levon, according to Robert, the Transylvanian Armenians could translate their social capital, particularly their government connections, into supportive symbolic influence from the Hungarian government. Unlike Armenian-speaking Armenians, the Transylvanian Armenians engage actively in cultural activities, such as erecting a cross stone, bringing exhibits from Transylvania to an exhibition. Robert, who questions the Transylvanian Armenian authenticity, still acknowledges their capability to maintain a certain diasporic order, distinguishing them from Armenian speakers. Now, the third group that I would like to speak, this is maybe the small group in Budapest, but I think one of the interesting ones also in terms of identity. So, and here my interview partner is Nairuhi. Nairuhi, a diaspora Armenian woman in her mid-40s from the Middle East. I will not reveal the country, so I will be using just the Middle East in this case. Settled in Hungary in the mid-90s. She began our conversation by connecting her everyday life in Hungary with her Middle Eastern roots, emphasizing her diasporic identity as Middle Eastern Armenian by roots. Nairuhi then highlighted the interplay of her descent and country of settlement, a characteristic that Rasmik actually considers as exemplary for the Middle Eastern Armenian in his book. So Nairuhi emphasized her distinct diaspora identity by valuing institutionalized cultural capital that she accumulated in Armenia. I think that the opening line is quite interesting. perhaps I'm a little more emphasized Armenian. So there was an emphasis of being Armenian. Because I went to study in Armenia, so cultural capital obtained from Armenia. I studied philology in the Armenian University. Then I worked as a teacher back home in the Middle East. And surely this description has a great effect on my everyday life now. I can say that I live in Hungary with 100% Armenian thoughts, and I live in Hungary by creating the Armenian environment. Instead of physically returning Armenia as a homeland, Nairobi viewed Armenia as a source of cultural capital, crucial for identity as an authentic Armenian. She expanded this cultural capital beyond Armenia's national borders, utilizing it within the diasporic space. Her Middle Eastern background and cultural capital accumulated in Armenia significantly shaped her everyday life in Hungary, emphasizing her diasporic identity. Nairobi highlighted the absence of an Armenian environment in Hungary, drawing parallels with her previous experience as a diasporan in the Middle East. I quote, "Well, we could not manage to open Sunday schools as the parents do not have any understanding of it. I know it very well, but other parents do not. They are too far from that environment. And you know why? Because I am from the diaspora and they are from Armenia. And Hungary is my second diaspora. I came from diaspora and I live here now. My mind is already entirely grounded with diaspora ideas. They are a little bit far from that." Conversely, she dismissed any diasporic socialization for Armenians who migrated to Hungary from Armenia, attributing to them an objectively non-diasporic mindset. How an Armenian who comes from Armenia could have a diasporic mindset, that was her main thought. Nairobi vividly portrayed Hungary's Armenian diasporic space, inhabited by actors with distinct diasporic habitus, shaped by specific time, space, circumstances of socialization. She also described multiple incompatible versions of Armenian identities constructed with Armenia in the Middle East and Hungary. So there are at least 3 dimensions for her when it comes to our Armeniances. Nairobi further explored the factors influencing her diasporic habitus as a Middle Eastern Armenian diaspora. Initially, she explained her transition into diaspora life and how her Arab education laid the foundation for her Armenian cultural identity. So her grandparents, survivors of 1915 genocide, resettled in the Middle East in the 1920s. For Nairobi, the genocide became a narrative of an embodied trauma that underscored her self-presentation as a diasporan, distinguishing herself as a grandchild of genocide survivors rather than a broad third-generation diasporan. So there was a shift in her narrative here. She established a connection to her diasporic status with that. Through the lens of embodied trauma, she drew a line of continuity of diasporic experience across generations. So she says, "You know, it is difficult to explain my child," she has already a boy, "that I became diasporan because of my tragic history." And I ask, like, "What do you mean by that?" She goes on, "The genocide. The reason for my tragedy is the genocide that I appeared in the Middle East. I mean, my ancestors, my grandparents, my great-grandparents from both sides. For instance, my grandparents from my mom's side were 5, 6, and 7, 8 years old kids who somehow escaped, and after a long, dangerous, and hard way, they reached to the Middle East. They were orphans and had to go through all the horrific sufferings before their arrival to the orphanage in a city of Middle East. They grew up in an orphanage, and then they found their life partners and created their new families. And I am their grandchild, and therefore my child is their great-grandchild. And I tried to explain my child all this story, but he always expressed in a way, yes, but now we have Armenia. By stating I appeared in the Middle East, Nairobi dismissed the country for birth in the Middle East as a homeland, distinguishing it from actual or imagined or ancestral homeland, which I think Susu will be unpacking today in a more detailed way. She also viewed her diasporic status attributed to the genocide as a permanent condition and sought to extend a similar status to her child through the diasporic agency. She wanted her child not to be a diasporan living in Hungary, but rather a great-grandchild of a genocide survivor. So that was her narrative that she wanted to pass. Nairobi's child growing up with a diasporic socialization in Hungary grapples with a bestowed diasporic identity as a great-grandchild of genocide survivor, while simultaneously recognizing the Republic of Armenia as an existing geographical entity. Neither his child negotiates their diasporic status within the binaries of stateless, but also state-linked diaspora, therefore transcending the genocide's trauma as the sole factor of their diasporic identity. Yeah, perfect. So let me move now. That is her self-image, who she is and how she views her as a diaspora Armenian. And now in 3 lines, I would like also to speak about how Nairohi was viewing the other diasporic groups, particularly the Transylvanian Armenians, Armenian-speaking Armenians, and also the ones who came after the 1990s. Let me begin with the first one. And I label this descent with an expiration date, and there's a quote: "Their ancestors were Armenians, but not they." Neither depicted the Transylvanian Armenians as a group that has undergone full assimilation, primarily comprised of a small number of elderly individuals who assert their Armenian heritage. The act of proclaiming one's roots involves a negotiation of descent, serving as a continuous link between ancestral past. Their current self-identification as a diaspora participant, on the other hand. Nairuhi, however, challenged the notion of an unbroken link between processing Armenian roots and asserting diasporic identity in the case of Transylvanian Armenians. She perceived as a disconnect, indicating that the claims of the Armenian descent lacking ongoing relevance due to the complete assimilation of this group. So her claim was these people might claim that they have Armenian descent, but they're assimilated. There is nothing Armenian in them. Her perspective introduced a temporal limitation to claims of Armenian ancestry, that is to say, descent has an expiration. So you cannot just claim that you're of Armenian descent and do nothing for that. So it's not enough to claim. Therefore, she rejected the Transylvanian Armenians as diaspora actors of Armenian descent, who, unlike their ancestors, are no longer Armenians. The second point, I have it here, unlabeled Armenians, and her quote was, "Consider what you want." Now I will unpack a little bit this. Nairohi included a post-genocide Armenians as her second group, diaspora group, encompassing both the genocide survivors who settled in Hungary a century ago and their second and third generation born in the country. Nairohi viewed this group as having a strong relationship to Hungary, with many of them being born, raised, and growing up only in Hungarian environment, not in Armenian environment in Hungary. Similar to the Transylvanian Armenians in Hungary, Nairobi considered the post-genocide Armenians also as assimilated. So the post-genocide group also is similar to Transylvanian Armenians. They're fully assimilated for her. She defined assimilation through diminishing the use of language. I quote, "They sometimes know some Armenian or do not know, and mixed marriages. They're married to non-Armenians." She depicted this group's claim to Armenian identity as stemming from a continuity of ancestral descent over several generations despite assimilation. More specifically, their claims of being Armenian relied on a perception of inheriting their Armenian heritage from their parents. And Nairobi challenged these claims not because the link of ancestral descent has expired, like in the case of the Transylvanian Armenians of Hungary, rather because of mixed marriages, which saw a disruptive factor of the continuity of Armenian descent. As a result, she hesitated to authenticate the further generations of mixed marriages as Armenians, and I quote, "I'll let you think about their children, consider what you want." Therefore, I just came up with this idea, maybe it's better not to label, and I call them unlabeled Armenians, consider what you want. And now the last part and the last group, Armenians after the 1990s. Nairobi described the Armenians who settled in Hungary after the 1990s from Armenia as different people with different backgrounds. These Armenians after the 1990s from Armenia as a group of diasporic actors constitute social generations that migrated in the same period of 1990s and from the same place. The different backgrounds of this group, of these actors, call into question the same qualifier for both the period of migration and the place of departure, and imply differentiations beyond continuity and discontinuity of descent, like in the case of the present generation of the Transylvanian Armenians of Hungary and the post-genocide Armenians. One of such different backgrounds relates to the behavior of diasporic actors before and after the settlement in Hungary. In that way, Nairi envisioned incompatibility of behavior between the actors' life experiences in the rural areas of Armenia and the urban life after the settlement in Hungary. She identified the diaspora actors with a lack of necessary experience of living in urban areas to demand authentication of Armenian descent through behavior in the Armenian diaspora setting of Hungary, where the majority of Armenians live now in Budapest. So from the villages of Armenia, their move to Budapest was kind of a moment for Nairu not to claim that they are not ready for a city life, therefore they cannot be Armenian. So they're not enough elite to be Armenian. For completing the authentication of those Armenian actors, Nairu observed the institutionalized cultural capital to the Armenians after the 1990s as another characteristic for this group. For her, Nairu identified the social position of these actors by unpacking the cultural capital as well as the strategies of conversion of the capital. What I mean, the actors with no institutionalized cultural capital, in this case, I mean the ones who do not have an education, that is her quote. So for her, having an education, it's a must to survive in the diaspora. And also economically, they don't have any power, so they're powerless people. No culture, no economy, therefore they will be the first one to assimilate within a decade. So that is the line of her of a narrative. Nairu recalled the Armenian language as the marker of cultural identity for diaspora Armenians, and for that reason, she did not authenticate these actors either, who migrated from Armenia as carriers of Armenian cultural identity, claiming these people speak more Armenian, these people use more Armenian words in their Armenian conversation than Armenian, therefore they don't have any Armenian language with them either. She pictured the everyday life of these actors as a struggle for survival and specified their social position with the absence of or low volume of culture or any economic capital. So they will survive and one day they will just assimilate. There is nothing to keep them Armenian, neither culture nor economic capital that they can invest anyhow. I think I will make a stop here and be ready to discuss with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harald. So we're not one happy family after all in the diaspora.
We're not.
No, we'll come back to this.
Yes.
We'll come back to this afterwards. Okay, so let's please remember your questions, write them down, and then we're going to come to the discussion later. So let's go to our third speaker.
I want to say some more because at the 12 I will leave. After him.
Yeah, you have to leave. Yes, let's hear the final panelist, and then we can go. Okay, so our final panelist for this morning session is Arsen Arzumanyan. I think Arsen does not need an introduction to this crowd. He has studied international relations, diplomacy, and political science, both in Armenia and in Romania. He has worked for the Romanian government. He has worked for the Armenian government. So he's very much a bridge, I think. And he has also worked for the Union of Armenians of Romania. So Arsen is going to talk about his book, which is about the Armenian orphanage of Strunga.
Thank you very much. So recently I've published a book about the Armenian orphanage in Strunga, and I would like to present a short history of this. So the village of Strunga, surrounded by the dense forests and clear springs, evokes profound feelings in the Armenian community in Romania. In April 1923, the Armenian orphanage in Strunga became a refuge for 200 children who survived the Armenian genocide. Fate decreed that these children would be orphaned or lose contact with their parents. Although the Armenian orphanage in Strunga had a short lifespan from 1923 to 1926, it left a deep mark on the hearts of Armenians in Romania. One can convince of this by browsing through thousands of pages of Armenian press published in Bucharest from 1922 until today. In all these newspaper pages, the selfless dedication of community members in the task of sheltering the orphans stood out. This could sometimes manifest as mutual criticisms or misunderstandings. However, throughout all these situations, the predominant concern was to ensure a decent life for the Armenian orphans. The primary source for a detailed study of the orphanage history is the newspaper Nor Arșaluis, New Dawn, editor-in-chief Paruir Levonian, the only bi-weekly publication printed in Armenian by 1923 in Bucharest. During the existence of the orphanage, 2 more periodicals were published which frequently referred to the activities of the orphanage. Notably, from July 1924, the magazine Ararat began to be published, editor-in-chief Vartan Mestugian, in Romanian, and from February 1925, the weekly Yerkir in Armenian, the country, editor-in-chief Măgărtici Bodurian. A large number of the articles of these 3 periodicals contained detailed information about the orphanage's activities and the children who spent their childhood there. As a result of the Armenian genocide, the Armenian Patriarchate in Constantinople faced a serious problem. There was an urgent need to address the plight of approximately 102,000 20,000 Armenian orphans in dire need of assistance. In order to provide the orphans with basic living conditions, to find their relatives, and to somewhat alleviate the burden on community institutions, lay and religious leaders visited their compatriots abroad, seeking their help. One of these destinations was the Armenian community in Romania. The Committee for the Protection of Orphans of Bucharest, established to solve the problems of Armenian orphans, put the basis of the Armenian orphanage in Strunga. Its president was Armenak Manisalian, a prominent representative of the community, a major grain exporter and philanthropist. He made significant contributions to the establishment of the orphanage in Strunga. The committee had the task of coordinating the donations from kind-hearted individuals, not only in the capital of Bucharest, but also in Constanța, Galați, Brăila, Iași, and other cities. So here in this picture, the children are in front of the Manisalian Palace in Constanța. Here is Simon Kehiayan, the vice president of that committee. Here are 2 other periodicals which were published in Bucharest, Masis and Paros. Paros, it's like Farul in Farul. So it was extremely difficult to choose a location that would provide decent living conditions for over 200 children, with bedrooms, classrooms, a kitchen, various workshops, etc. Finally, after a long search, the choice stops at the village of Strunga, where the summer hotel of Armenian Robert Murad is transformed into a new home for orphans. This location was also chosen due to its proximity to urban centers inhabited by Armenians, such as Roman, Iași, Bacău, Suceava, and Botoșani. This would have facilitated the involvement of Armenians from these cities in supporting the activities of the orphanage. The ship that left from Constantinople arrives in Constanța on the 12th of April 1923, where 200-300 local Armenians come to greet the orphans. The issue of the Armenian orphanage in Strunga gradually becomes the most important subject of the Armenian community in Romania. For its establishment and development, quite a lot of resources are used. This initiative of the Armenians of Romania to help their compatriots was unprecedented in the entire history of the community. So school classes started on the 1st of May, held by 2 teachers and 3 female teachers. On August 28, the official opening ceremony of the orphanage took place. Then sports competitions were organized among the children. The entire elite of the Armenian community in Romania was present at the event. So we have 2 pictures from the opening ceremony. In his speech, Armenak Manisalian especially emphasized the role of the orphanage staff, who took great care of the children. Among the teachers of the orphanage, apart from the director Sarkis Srens, let's also mention the Armenian poet Sareh Bulbul Baronian, the satirical writer and publicist Levon Shaterian, and the educator Nășan Maganian. Here is Nășan Maganian with his family. For some years in Strunga, this picture is from Strunga. For some years, the orphanage operated some workshops in special carpet making and shoemaking. The children's skills were developed in the field of agriculture on the land next to the orphanage. Vazgen Mardirosyan taught the children shoemaking, and Sirak Kaskanyan made a significant contribution to the development of carpet weaving in the orphanage. It is noteworthy that the orphanage obtained significant revenues from the sale of carpets made in that workshop. After his visit to Strunga in February 1924, Parui Levonian, the editor-in-chief of Nor Arshaluis, published an extensive article in which he presents the real situation of the orphanage at that time. By the way, Parui Levonian was the son of the famous troubadour Ashur Jivani, Serovbe Benkoyan. He was one of the famous national figures of the early 20th century and served as the mayor of the city of Alexandropol, now Gyumri, between 1919 and 1920. Friend of the road, of course. But then they had some, you know. Yes, Guyana. Levonian emphasizes that from the very first day of the establishment of the orphanage, issues related to its location, the future of the children, and many others have been a constant source of disagreement within the community. As Parui Levonian noted in his initial impressions, the orphans looked lively and healthy and had a face as red as an apple, typical of Armenian boys from Armenia, which gave me much hope. This is his words. An important issue was that by that time there were no longer any seriously ill among them, among children, taking into consideration that when they first arrived in Romania, most of children were suffering from various diseases. So the life of the orphanage became difficult during the extremely cold winter. A proof of the harsh winter at the beginning of 1924 is the letter from the orphanage to the Central Committee in Bucharest. The problem of providing the orphanage with firewood for the entire winter period was not yet resolved. Here that letter marked urgent. So, for the last time, we inform you that we barely have firewood for another 10 days in our orphanage. After that, we will burn the benches and tables from the canteen, for which we cannot be held responsible as we cannot let the orphans freeze. So, valuing the impressions of Levonian, let's present some of them. We have many clever orphans who simply captivate us with their innate intelligence. They are very interested in the situation of Armenia. The children are satisfied with the teachers and the conditions of the orphanage. Asked to sing, Levonian sang several songs, and to his surprise, the boys and girls started singing many songs they knew. Levonian joyfully writes that the improvised party was more cheerful and enjoyable than the pre-prepared official school celebrations. It's worth noting that in addition to the main subject, the children made significant progress in the Romanian language. During the annual celebration on 7th of September 1924, the children, impressed with the remarkable knowledge that had acquired that year, and they sang the royal anthem so well that the Romanian audience present was astounded. Were these merely the Armenian orphans from the day before, or were they also Romanians among them? In one of the articles of Arad magazine, this celebration is detailed along with the list of donors and their contributions. This article alone is enough for us to imagine how the Armenians of Romania took care of the Strunga orphanage, sparing nothing to offer the orphans a carefree childhood. Thanks to the report of the Central Committee, we have a clearer picture of the internal organization of the orphanage. The condition of many children who arrived in Romania with various diseases improved not only due to the healthy air and excellent water from Strunga, but also due to the quality daily food served to the orphans. So this is what they bought for children. It is in Armenian. So like tea, sugar, so on. And all of this happened in the context of the orphanage's financial problems due to the rising prices of basic foods, especially bread, and damage caused by hail in the orphanage's 9-hectare gardens. When a child completed the 3-year course and turned 15, 16 years old, the Central Committee, through its branches, tried to find families willing to adopt them. The report emphasizes that by that time, 75 of the 200 orphans had already moved to Bucharest or other cities. Although most of the adopted children received parental care, some families unfortunately violated their obligations and instead of treating them like parents, exploited them by subjecting them to hard labor. Following the committee's investigation, 8 children were returned to the orphanage. Not by chance, the Central Committee of the General Armenian Union of Physical Education invites Hagop Bastigyan, a member of the Scouts Committee, to Strunga with the aim of developing scouting. Bastigyan explains to the children the essence of scouting, orientation methods, excursions, etc., and shares stories that highlight the life of scouts, creating great enthusiasm among the children. Discussions about the future of the Strunga orphanage are causing serious disagreements within the community. The issue of relocating the children was discussed at the meeting of the Central Committee of the orphanage, and some participants proposed moving all 93 children to Bucharest, while others Bucharest, Constanța, and Galați. Additionally, publicist Levon Shaterian deems the orphanage's relocation to Bucharest as unrealistic and states that the orphanage's administrators, instead of wasting time on various ventures, should choose the only realistic way to solve the problem and do everything possible to find the parents or closer or distant relatives of the orphans anywhere in the world. Given the situation, resignations took place in June, July 1926. Manisalian resigns from his position as president of the Central Committee due to the disagreements with other members. Shortly after Manisalian's resignation, almost the entire staff of the orphanage, including the director and administrator Serenți, resigned. Here is the Mestujan notes that after so many resignations, the orphanage itself became orphaned. So the search for a new director begins, who should also teach several subjects. As it is known, this role is fulfilled by one of the teachers, Nishan Maganyan, until the orphanage's closure. The editor-in-chief of the weekly Yerkir, Magardish Bodurian, taking into consideration the situation in the orphanage, continues to insist that the remaining orphans in Strunga should be placed as soon as possible in Armenian families, thus closing one of our wounds. The author repeatedly reminding about the need to close the orphanage and to find solutions to ensure a better and secure future for the orphans, stating that closing an institution is unfortunate, but closing an orphanage is a success. Finally, 3 of the 5 remaining children are sent to Constantinople, and the other 2 are placed in families. So the children who leave the orphanage end up in various countries or different Romanian cities. This is Vartan Mestujan, the editor-in-chief of Ararat. So one of the orphans who came to Strunga was Aram Gharibian, who later studied in Bucharest and became a renowned painter and sculptor. He repatriated to Armenia in 1946. His artworks graced the collection of the famous art historian and collector Grigor Zambakcian, but also the office of the head of the Armenian diocese in Romania, Archimandrite Vazgen, who later became the Catholicos of all Armenians. Vazgen took his favorite painting by Aramik with him and placed it in the reception hall of the Echmiadzin Patriarchate, the religious center of the Armenians. Aramik's paintings are also showcased at the National Gallery in Armenia. The future journalist, publicist Vahe Bahadurian who lost his father and 25 relatives during the Armenian genocide, spent part of his childhood in the Strunga orphanage. Vahe made great strides, graduated from the Misakian Kesimian School in Bucharest, and in 1934, the Murad Rafaelian School in Venice. Upon returning to Bucharest, he became an active member of the Armenian community and the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, Dashnak-Tsutyun, and the driving force of the weekly Haimamul of Magardich Bodurian. During these years, he established close ties with the prominent community members and newspaper correspondents Vahan Gemijan, Jirair Karakashian, Suren Kolanjan, Levon Baljan, Catholicos Vazke. At the 1938 Dashnak-Tsutyun party meeting held in Bucharest, Bahadurian decided to leave the party in response to the expulsion of Sarkis Araratian, former finance minister of the First Republic of Armenia. Araratian, of whose camp Vahe Bahadurian was a part, was a supporter of famous commander Garagin Nejdeh's ideology. Nejdeh had also previously been expelled from the party and had been ousted under pressure from another famous commander, Drastamat Kanayan Tero. After the establishment of the communist regime, he managed to escape from Romania in 1946 and eventually settled in Argentina, where he published the periodical Nechka, the Present, between 1961 and 1970. Hairapet Bostanjan also lived in Strunga orphanage, who later settled in Constanța. In his interview given to the Ararat magazine in 1994, he recounts the horrors he experienced during the Armenian genocide. Not coincidentally, Bostanjan took a symbolic step. He adopted a girl from an orphanage in Armenia, Mariam Bostanjan, and brought her to Romania. Later on, she worked for many years at the Ararat Publishing House in Bucharest. From the orphans album, the photos of 18 children are missing, and the personal files of 8 boys are completely cut out. It is assumed that some took only their photo as a memory, while others took their entire file. Miralda and Christina Neculai, granddaughters of one of the orphans of Strunga, Kalust Kazarian, diligently preserved the only memento of their grandfather related to the orphanage, his personal file from that album, this one. Unbeknownst to them, this was a page cut from the orphans album. Kazarian, in fact, had cut out his own page from the album in order to keep it as a memory. In doing so, he inadvertently also removed from the album the page of the boy on the opposite side, Arsen Tokatlian. The stories of Nurhan Aghlamishan and his sister, Eliz Aghlamishan, are also interesting. Here is Eliz Aghlamishan and Nurhan Aghlamishan with his wife. Along with their brother Khachik, they lost their entire family during the genocide. Nurhan's sons implemented several charitable projects in Armenia, including the establishment of the Vahagan Aghlamishan AECP Regional Eye Center in the city of Yeregnadzor in Vayodzor region. In 2023, the centenary of the orphanage's establishment is marked. For this occasion, the Union of Armenians in Romania organized events in Iași and Strunga. One of the most symbolic actions dedicated to the orphanage's centenary was the placement of a commemorative stone sculpted from pink tuff in Armenia at Vanadzor, next to the main road in front of the local council and library of the Strunga commune. The author of the sculpture is Bogdan Hovhannisyan, whose Khachkars cross stones can be found in Romania and Bucharest in the Palace of Parliament, in Botoșani and Iași. While working on the commemorative stone, the sculpture witnesses a rare phenomenon. Within the block of pink tuff, there are portions of black tuff. The experienced sculptor, who has never encountered such a phenomenon in his life, says, "For me, It was more than symbolic that this miracle of nature had to happen during the work dedicated to the Armenian orphanage. The black tooth emerging from the pink tooth seemed to symbolize through this orphanage the wound of the Armenian people. He decides to use this miracle, and on the he reproduces this wound through ornaments. The final part of my speech I would like to dedicate to the Armenian Mausoleum Chapel, which was situated behind the orphanage. In one of the articles of Ararat magazine from 1926, we find some information about the Armenian Inge Agop or Inge Robert, who had a great reputation in Strunga. The author of the article notes that on the hill behind the orphanage, there is a mausoleum with several graves where Inge Agop and his sons Tigran and Mardiros are buried. Who was Inge Agop? In his youth, he led an adventurous life. Due to the persecutions and crimes against the Armenian populations in his hometown, Kharbert, he was forced to leave the city and ends up in Adrianople, where he enters the service of a pasha. Because of an affair with one of the Turkish dignitaries' women, Agop flees from there and after a long journey arrives in Yash and enlists in the bodyguard of the ruler of Moldova, Mikhail Sturza. In the 1816s, Inge Agop began to produce finely cut tobacco, and thanks to this business, he became rich. Hence his nickname Inge, which in Turkish and Crimean Tatar means thin. Probably because of the tobacco monopoly in the market, he's forced to abandon that business and buys estates in Strunga and some other villages. In Strunga, a little-known settlement by that time, he discovers sulfuric sources and builds a climatic resort with a large and spacious building to accommodate visitors. His son Mardiros, on a vast plot of land surrounded by spruce forests, constructs the pavilions that would later become the house of the orphans. It seems he has predestined for the son of the one who fled half a century earlier from the massacres in Kharbert to build a haven for sheltering the children of those killed during the World War, during the Armenian genocide. However, Inge Agop's business in Strunga does not succeed, and he loses a significant portion of the wealth he had amassed in Yash. On his deathbed, he wishes to be buried on the hill at the edge of Strunga village where the mausoleum stands, which would later become a chapel. The Armenian historian Hagop Siruni wrote an article on the occasion of the official opening of the orphanage on 28th of August 1923, to which he went to participate along with the famous satirist and journalist Yervant Otian. The latter lived in Bucharest and was a correspondent for the Verchin Lur Last News daily in Constantinople. Siruni's article has exceptional historical value for the Armenian community in Romania, as it contains unique data related to the Strunga orphanage and especially the Mausoleum Chapel. This was built in 1898 by Robert Murad, the nephew of Inge Agop, and possibly the only heir of the family's land. Inside there was an inscription in Romanian where he was mentioned as Robert Mili, as found in other sources. This monument was erected by Robert Mili in memory of the former owner of this place and his uncle Agop Inge, who died on 1st of May 1892 for his eternal rest and the bones of the Robert family. The religious leader of Armenians in Romania, Husik Zohrabian, transformed that mausoleum into a chapel named Holy Martyrs. However, the mausoleum chapel only lasted for a few decades as the orphanage. The Second World War proved fatal for it. Like many neighboring buildings, it was bombed, leaving no trace of its existence today. In the pages of the Nor Arshaluis, of the newspaper Nor Arshaluis, I managed to find the only known picture of the Mausoleum Chapel Holy Martyrs. So you can see this is in the center of the picture is the orphanage, and behind it on the hill is that chapel, Mausoleum Chapel. Marwan photographed the orphanage buildings from an airplane. This picture was taken from the airplane, and in the background on the hill, you can see that chapel. The hill on which the Mausoleum Chapel was built is located on the right side of the exit from Strunga towards Târgu Frumos. Visiting that place, we became convinced that there is no visible trace left of it. Interestingly, even today, the locals refers to the area in Strunga, which also includes the hill, they call La Capella, at the chapel. This name has been passed down from generation to generation, and what is the most interesting thing that nobody in that village knows which chapel is being referred to, that it is an Armenian chapel. Thank you very much.
So there is no trace of the orphanage. And what year was the orphanage closed?
In 1926.
1920.
4 years, yeah.
Closed in 1920.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have three. Thank you. We have three fascinating papers. Why don't you stay here, and I'll invite the other two speakers, Hagor and Levon, to join us here. Bring a chair, and I think we have about 20 minutes or so for discussion.
Հայրենը երբ լինի, the Armenian version will be soon, so I will send you a photo. Հա, իհարկե։ Ուղղակի պիտի տեղավորվեի ժամանակի մեջ, թե չէ որ սկսեի պատմել Լևոնյանի։ Այստեղ էր նաև գիտեք ով Կուրոտ Աշխանյանը, ով Համլետ։ Վերջերս գտանք Համլետը Գասպարյան։
Բայց ես օրգային եմ հանդիպել։
We had three fascinating papers. One on art history, one on the orphanage in Romania, and Armenians in Hungary from a sociological perspective. So this is your chance to ask questions, argue, make counterpoints. So the floor is yours. But in the meantime, as you're thinking of a question, let me ask Levon Chukasyan a question. Professor Chukasyan, you presented a fascinating array of artists who wrote about, who painted the genocide or the massacres. Do these paintings, or have any of these paintings, besides Ayvazovsky, made their way into the broader artistic canon of horror or conflict art, globally speaking, or is it very much within the Armenian art scene?
It is very much within Armenian, because you have to imagine that, take into consideration that it is very sensitive subject, and it is very difficult to explore that and or teach about that. Myself, I was teaching 3 months at Fresno State this subject, and it's very depressing subject. That's why this is one problem. Second, that many artifacts are scattered and even in private collections in different countries, and people who possess them sometimes don't understand the value of them. In San Francisco, for instance, I saw the collection of portraits made by painters who worked in orphanage as a teacher, and son of him didn't knew that he has portraits of girls who were taken into harems, and they were tattooed here with crosses, and then they were liberated because there was such a activity. One gold piece for an orphan. They were gathering orphans from harems, Armenian organizations, and they are paying Mekvorpin. And this was a Pan-Armenian initiative, and initiated by Armenians. And so another problem is that there are illustrations of artifacts which are printed in different newspapers, published in diaspora or in Western Armenian press, and the originals we don't know where. So we can judge with old photographies. And there are so many paintings made in diaspora, because till 1956 almost, in Soviet Armenia, it was not allowed to portray genocide or massacres. And one of the first artifacts on this subject is Sarkis Muradyan's painting entitled Last Night of Komitas, when Komitas is seated near piano and door is opened, he is gazing those who are entering, and these are Turkish gendarmes, policemen who came to arrest him. So with this painting was started such a movement to portray genocide through the image of Komitas. And many sculptures, many paintings were created by Soviet Armenian painters representing Komitas. That's why he became like a symbol of genocide. But in diaspora, they were created absolutely another kind of paintings. And there were done paintings not only in a classic style, but also surrealistic even, and symbolic, futuristic. Among them, there are real masterpieces, because are created by painters who lived in France, who lived in Lebanon, and also this subject is touching another subject, the theme of orphan painters who succeeded to survive and became painters, received education in Egypt, in Lebanon, and in other places. And this is a subject which is embracing, let's say, several hundred pieces, as much as I know, maybe more. But I have gathered many things during my life, many artworks, and so I hope that I will find possibilities to publish this material. It is in English. I have created it 15 years ago when I was teaching at Fresno. It was completely translated into Armenian. Some parts I have published in Armenian press of Armenia, inside of Armenia, in occasion of April 24th in different newspapers. And also some parts are published in Armenian Question Encyclopedia, which is in Russian, and other publication in Armenian. And so completely it is not published. This subject was for the first time published as a separate book by late Shayan Khachaturian, a famous art critic, but there is no text and there are no sources. There are no sources where you can find the reproductions of artifacts. Who wrote ever about this subject? So it's a beginning, but it is not enough.
Right,
So,
thank you, Levin. Any other questions? Yes, and then we'll come here.
I have a question for Professor Sebastian. As a non-expert, sorry, but the question I have is, other than the painting of his mother and him by Archie, can we consider his later works as part of genocide art, so to speak, or not? Including, I think, one of these major works when he was already into abstract expressionism. I think there's a painting that represents his village in Van. Can we consider it part of genocide art or not?
of course. Of course, because let's pay attention to the fact that those people who survived and who left their homeland and went to other countries, they were absolutely not ready psychologically to accept this cultural shock, cultural differences of countries where they appeared. And uh, they lived till the end of their life with divided identity. Part of their soul and heart was with previous life. People, their relatives, they were living in their memory. Their childhood memories were living inside of them. And meantime, they were in a known environment, in among absolutely other people with absolutely another past and national character. And if we are talking about Ashur Gorky, so he was uh, among people who were not understanding him, let's say this way. If he was going to talk about genocide or lost homeland, this subject was not interesting for them. And so he was obliged to adjust himself to these people. From the other side, Armenians, survivors, orphans, who were inside of America, and one of my grandfather's sister's son, Vahan Ghazarian, was his close friend, also orphan, from orphanages of Greece to America, and then uh, he was quite often visiting place of Gorky. Gorky with orphans, with survivors, was talking about lost country, about lost homeland. But he was unable to speak with them about his art. They were not understanding his art. Each time Gorky was presenting him a sketch to my relative, he was taking this sketch, going out, and in the nearest garbage container, putting that. In this way, during years, he destroyed his
Fortune.
fortune. Because he didn't receive high education. He was self-taught, and he became editor of newspaper Pan Sebastian and Compatriot Union's journal, and also Le Raber. And both were with communistic views. Both Gorky, even Gorky's wife, and himself, Van Ghazarian, and they were blaming capitalist countries who started First World War, and Armenians became victims of them. So uh, you see, this is a drama which was among in hearts of many Armenians, but Gorky was unable to show that drama because he was accepted as a person who started new wave in art. He was deciphering. He was codifying his art. He was codifying because there was a need to express his thoughts, but he was obliged to codify that.
All right. Yes.
Concerning Ashir Gorky, there is a legend that after achieving the portrait with his mother, he removed the hands and left white spots, and he said, "This portrait will not be achieved till the humankind will recognize our massacres." So this is the message he sent to the world. An unpicted part of the picture is more symbolistic concerning the genocide. But Levon, I want to add something.
His art was enigma, and is enigma.
Yeah. If you take into account the recognition of the Holocaust, it was first of all a cultural phenomenon, not a political one. Because the recognition of the Holocaust started after the Holocaust movie in the United States. It was at the very moment when humanity was aware about what's happened with the Jews. till the end of the 8th decade of the last century, the humanity didn't know a lot of things about the Hebrew Holocaust. This movie, after that, Steven Spielberg and others, it's a cultural phenomenon, Nobel Prize and so on. It's interesting to make a study about how the art supported the recognition of the genocide. My personal opinion that the support coming from the cultural dimension was quite weak. For example, we failed the Berthel's novel because 40 Days of Two had a movie with Kabir Bedi with the fake. Didn't have anything to do with the novel of Bertel and so on and so on. We have, for example, Masseria delle Arondole, but it's a novel a little bit artificial. It's not very authentic or certain. So this is about my personal opinion that we have to do a lot in this field of culture, because the culture is more powerful for convince than the political statements of political.
It's better to show than to.
Short intervention, just very short.
Yes.
Before you develop this, do not forget that in the worldwide recognition of the Holocaust, the perpetrators, the Germans, played a fantastic role. I don't see that role being played by the Turks. So when you do such cross-cultural, cross-historical comparisons, think about the actors. The actors that provided the most important support for the globalization of the problem of the Holocaust, or the Germans themselves, because they used, the post-World War II Germany used the self-condemnation for the Holocaust. Now, this is another discussion, I don't get into it, but they used it in various ways. Now, sincerely, hypocritically, this is a longer discussion. But they turned this into a global phenomenon. The Turks didn't.
And now,
There is another
No,
fact.
let's give a chance to others as well. Yeah, please, go ahead.
First of all, in 2001, we decided to create un forum de communauté arménienne de l'Europe, avec Toros Sangelian de Genève, Vahe Abrar de Genève, and others. During the meeting, I understood very interesting things. It was there around the round table, a lot of people coming from different countries, maybe 20. So Forum de l'Europe, the only European-born Armenian was me. All of them, the leaders were from Bolsa High, Barska High, Libarana High, Surya High, Hayasansi. So we represented the Armenian communities in Europe, but the only European speaking Armenian was me. This is the first one. The second one. It's not very characteristic to discuss about the evolution of the diaspora with a country like Armenia. The only countries in Europe where you can discuss the diaspora as an evolving, continuous phenomenon are Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and France. And why? Because the survivors from the genocide, they went to the harbors. They went, the stateless survivors went to Constanța, Varna, Pireu, and Marseille. Those four harbors were the doors among for the survivors to enter Europe. This is the reason why all those four communities, they have the ring of this channel. Without the survivors of the genocide in Hungary, it was a break between the old Armenians from Transylvania and the new entered Armenians from 80s from Middle East and from 90s from Armenia and the former Soviet Union. This is the reason why it's a problem between the descendants from Ani and the refugees from Middle East. In Romania, we don't have this problem. Why? Because from the old diaspora, Me, for example, we know very well Armenian. In the same time, we are rooted in the Romanian life, and the presence of the survivors of the genocide put together the new waves of hierarchy and the old existence communities from Transylvania and Moldavia. It's a lack of continuity in Hungary, and this is there are some hostility between the two of them. This is the first one. The second one, by chance, I know two of them, despite the fact that the names are hidden. One of them is a violinist. He was leader of the self-government, and the other one is Alexa Vanisia. I know them, I identify them very well. I don't know with Marika, because Marika is very wrong. Armenians were not assimilated 300 years ago. No, it's wrong. Armenians, they kept their language. Militar Mosh Goch legal framework till the Austro-Hungarian dualism. Till then, they were completely Armenian. If you go now to the church in the cathedral in Gerla, you see written in Armenian on the windows of the cathedral. I met in Gerla Armenians speaking Armenian, pronouncing Haimer and other. The primary school was there, existed there since 30s. So it's wrong. They started to be assimilated on a very strong, powerful way. First of all, after 1867, but after the Second World. And why? Because the Armenian Catholic Church was forbidden in Romania, being Oriental Catholic Church. And all the Armenian community, they passed under the umbrella of the Roman Catholic Hungarian Church. But now, because we have an authority in Romania, Union of Armenians in Romania, and the Union of Armenians is a laic one, it's not Catholic, it's not Orthodox, it's not the highest party, it's not all this, it's only one single voice. We put closer and closer those moments. Now they have chorus in the church. During the mass, they sing in Armenian. They have a dance group named
It's true that there were people from both sides of the Carpathians, and that is something extraordinary. When the centennial was celebrated, there were people from...
It's not true that the Hungarian authorities, they encourage the Armenian element in Hungary.
I didn't make that kind of claim. I didn't make any political claim. It was not.
This is a problem. They don't have any support.
Yeah, but I didn't make any political claim. Let's be clear. Yeah. I didn't make any political claim that Hungarian government is supporting anything. What I wanted to say that in 1993, Hungarian government developed this minority law, right, just to protect minorities in the territory. How it works, or how it worked in the 1990s. So this is not a question. We can argue why Hungary developed that law, right? Because of the external factor, having diaspora Hungarians. So living outside of the boundaries, just living outside of boundaries, then that was a message towards other countries that, we do take care of your, own nationals in the territory of Hungary. We have to take care of the Hungarians, and it was also a precondition for the EU and membership for the first of all in 1995 to the Council of Europe, that you have to develop national minority protection conventions and frames. So that was the political context, and I didn't make any political statement here. Second, to your argument, I do believe that we have to study countries without being representative. I didn't make any claim that while studying Hungary, we can make claims for the Eastern Europe as a region. So I didn't make any that kind of claim. If you go to Germany, you will find a lot of also Turkish-speaking, like the ones who come from the Ottoman Empire, the ones who came as Gastarbeiter in the 60s, who still speak Turkish, no Armenian at all, but they have their own community, cultural community. They call themselves Turkish Armenians. There's also another community who came from in the 70s and the 80s when the Iran revolution happened, and they speak Persian and Farsi, non-Armenian, or they speak Eastern Armenian. There's also post-Soviet Armenians who speak more Russian, so there are different fractures of the community. We cannot claim that any diaspora is representative for now. It's not about that I'm against studying Romania. Of course, no, it's not about that I make bigger claims. But what I wanted to show, a theoretical model that how dissent and practice come together. And when we see these two axes, what is happening in the diaspora? I went to Gela a couple of years ago and I visited an old lady. She was not speaking at all Armenian. The only comment which she made that, oh, you have beautiful Armenian eyes. So what I wanted to say that nothing now is instrumental. We cannot play with the language. We cannot define Armenian as that there's one way of being Armenian. That was the point that I wanted to make. And also to your opening remarks. Maybe we have to pluralize the understanding of diasporas. And also, what is the role of the genocide? What is the role of the language? What is the role of the language? Where is the homeland? Because for Transylvanian Armenians in Hungary, current Armenia is not the homeland. They make references to Ani. Why they do that, this is not a reason.
You know, because I'm the leader of this community,
Yeah.
I have another approach about that. How to manage to put them together. It's a problem.
Well, as a scholar, it is not my goal.
How to stop the German genocide, the white genocide assimilation. How to do all of things. This is our main problem. Of course, we understand that they're different, but how common values? How can help to survive the people who started to forget? How to find the roots? How to use the knowledge of Armenian of the new enters to help the others?
The next conference should be about policy making.
Yes.
I'm
ready to give
how to do this.
Yeah, I'm ready to give some policy recommendations, but as a scholar, that was not my mission to bring the fractures.
So,
Absolutely.
Sophie, you had a question very quickly, then we have a short coffee break so we can start again.
I'm afraid I don't have a short question, but I'll try and shorten it.
Okay, well.
Thank you for these wonderful presentations, and I thought I found your paper really exciting. So I'm just going to give you a couple of things to respond to. I really like your concept and utilization of authenticity, and I wondered whether you could invite you to talk a little bit more about that. Because what you were sort of illustrating is different groups of people kind of determining and policing the boundaries of what's true or authentic Armenianness is. And I wondered also how that content is being determined itself. If it's not language, if it's not religion, is it just dissent? Is it just some form of practice? And of course, culture is always evolving. So even talking about culture is also somewhat problematic in its way. So that was really interesting. I wondered whether Ani Bakalian's work, I'm sure you're familiar with, the idea of being to feeling Armenian was also useful here. The idea of feeling Armenian and the content of that actually changing in different groups at different times is also relevant. I think your point about different diaspora constituencies and so on is entirely pertinent here. I'm thinking about differentiating between post-90s state-generated diaspora, formerly removed from the economic moment. This is a new diaspora that is linked to the Armenian state, whereas of course we're talking about older diasporas that are not. And that is a kind of point of tension that I think is worth exploring a little bit more in the work. Lastly, I wanted to ask you whether there are spaces and sites where these different groups come together and are united around a cause. Is it church? Is it political causes like infrastructure? Is it AXA? I wonder whether you could speak a bit more about that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for the fantastic questions. Let me begin with the book by Ani Bakalian. I mean, the study is quite old already, but because she did her study in 1993, I guess, right, for the New York area. I think I'm playing with one. I mean, she's playing with one mode of, from being to feeling. But I think Ratchilingirian also adds another mode to that, like talking as Armenian. Thinking Armenian. I mean, there are different variations, being and the rest. My approach is being and becoming. So that is a theoretical aspiration that I have from Stuart Hall, the post-colonial way of thinking, because becoming is more future-oriented and the outcome is not quite obvious or given. So becoming will give us most possibilities to see if we have fitting component, if we have Not at all. Full stop component. We have continuation and the rapture. So that is the moment when I try to play a bit more. Then to your point, what is content of authenticity? So I think the theoretical model what I developed was diaspora as a social field, and diaspora capital is the thing to fight for. And the ones who have successful competition and struggle for that, they will define. So if, let's say, if the Transylvanian Armenians of Hungary are the most successful group in the struggle, they will define the authenticity beyond ethnicity, beyond practicing. So it will be just pure descent. Armenian is one just by descent. Practicing is not important. You don't have to speak the language to become Armenian. So just knowing your heritage, knowing where do you come from, even 25% of Armenian blood, if you go into that discourse, would qualify you as an Armenian. So that depends. I think it's a more empirical question in this case. So I position this as a contestation in the core of a struggle, symbolic struggle that different groups come together, to define vis-a-vis the state policy, because the policy brings it to, classificatory systems, the language, which is already with a big question mark, and also 100 years of being in the Hungarian soil. So, of course, it is against the state policy in this case. Yeah, I think, but the rest of the question, I can share more opinion maybe during the break.
Thank you. I think we have to wrap this up. Very fascinating panel. Let me just add one little thing. I grew up in a very small town in southern Ontario in Canada, English-speaking town. And we moved there in 1976 from Lebanon. I was 12 years old at that point. And that community, the Armenian community there, was established in the 1890s in that little town, fleeing the Hamidian massacres. So when we went there, there was an Armenian community, organized community. There was an Armenian community center and all that. And the descendants of the 1819 generation and the post-genocide generation. Some of the dynamics that you were explaining in Hungary existed in that community. The older generation, which had come only 1 or 2 generations before, had the same reservations about the newcomers, and the newcomers had the same reservations about the old comers. So none of them were imagining Ani as their homeland, but they were, that tension between the newcomers and the old comers is the constant story of every diasporan community everywhere. So it's not something terribly new or shocking. Yeah. Anyway, with that, let's go have coffee, and then at 12 o'clock or maybe 12:05, we'll start the next session, the final session.
10 past 12.
10 past 12, okay.
Let me be for the change.
This is yours, this is mine.